east corner is a tree with a pond back some ways away from the house, right?
To the north of the fire pit.
Right. So this is what I'm struggling with. This is where I'm having some difficulty. If you have such a good view of the fire pit and the pond with the tree where JJ was found, if your purpose is to observe and see what's going on for some nefarious reason, why would he move?
I believe he was advised to, so they could get crime scene stuff in and out of that driveway.
Okay, so he was told he had to get out of there.
I believe so.
Okay, do you know who told him that?
I don't.
Okay. So then he drives out and goes in front of the house in the driveway.
Correct.
There's no other place to go. He has to go in the driveway, right?
If he wants to remain at the house, yes.
Right. And it's your testimony that he was looking around a little bit at that point, right?
Correct.
Okay, so, he wasn't emotional at that point, right?
I didn't have a good vantage point to determine that.
He didn't have a look of fear on his face at that point. Is that right?
Not that I could see.
Okay. He didn't have a look of nervousness or tension or anything like that, did he?
I believe that he did.
You believe he did?
Yes.
Are you basing that on him turning his head and looking around?
Multiple times.
Okay, how many times is multiple?
There was 4 or 5, and then him exiting the vehicle.
Okay. Okay. So if someone is on your property and there are 30 police officers digging around on your property, you don't think someone would be curious about what's going on your property?
That's why I said that I believe he was nervous.
Okay, he was curious.
It could be both, yes.
Oh, okay. 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 But then he didn't run at that point, right?
No.
He went over to his daughter's, right?
Correct.
And he was there for an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, right?
Correct.
And then we just saw the video. He got accelerated a little bit, 50 miles an hour in Salem Highway. And when he stopped, he was planning on going to see his lawyer, right?
I don't know that.
Okay. Well, why would Lieutenant Ball say he's going to have to come to you? Was that
Calls for speculation, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Lieutenant Ball said to him, your lawyer's going to have to come to you, right?
Something along those lines, yes.
So there was at least a discussion about going to see the lawyer, right?
I don't know that.
Okay. You just think that was a statement Lieutenant Ball would just throw out there?
Judge, this has been asked and answered. It's a pure speculation. The witness doesn't know.
I'll move on, Judge.
Well, again, I'd like to be allowed a chance to rule on that, and it is sustained as asked and answered. So do move on, Mr. Pryor.
Okay. Now, after you put Chad in the back of the car and what we talked about with Emma, talking about the finances, and there was a time when Emma made a comment that I can tell by your expression that you didn't know what was going on out there, something to that effect. You remember hearing that?
Yes.
Okay, and you saw Chad's eyes when they talked about the body and his expression. So he had a reaction to that surprise. Would you agree with that?
I couldn't see that.
Okay, but obviously we have the video and we can make our own determination at some point, right?
Sure.
What the reaction was when he's told about a body that was being found. Okay. So then subsequent to that time, after Emma left, if you look at the outside camera of the premises, Chad, at one point, you talked about this, looked back, right? And you said that was towards the fire pit, right?
There were multiple times that he looked back towards that area, yes.
But if he was looking back, if you look at the position of the car, isn't it true that he was actually looking back at his daughter walking away and Officer Dave Hope behind the vehicle?
I don't know.
You don't know what he was looking at?
No, I don't know where Emma was at. She lives in front of the vehicle, so I don't know why she would be behind it.
Okay, and then the video speaks for itself, though, as to what exactly Chad was looking at, right?
It shows what direction he was looking at.
Okay, on the outside body, the outside cam of your vehicle, right?
In the front, I don't know what outside cam you're talking
The
about.
camera that was recording the encounter from the outside of your vehicle.
My body cam,
No, there were two cameras there.
the
There's
front car camera,
front car camera, and then there was the one inside the car as well, right?
correct.
Okay. But the cameras will speak to themselves as to where Chad was looking, right?
Yes,
Okay. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I may be mistaken. But I thought you previously testified that by looking straight out the window, the way Chad's vehicle was positioned, that looking straight out the driver's or the passenger side window or the window he was in would be right directly at the fire pit. Isn't that what you testified to?
his residence.
Okay. So you're telling me that by looking behind or back, he's looking away from his residence. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. So again, what time did you drop Chad off at the jail?
Believe it was approximately 12:45.
Okay. And I just need to clarify something else. How have you been on that property before?
Prior to that day?
Yeah.
No,
Okay. All right. But you saw cadaver dogs there on that day?
yes.
Okay. And again, what time did you get back from after you dropped Chad off?
Back to the residence approximately 13:30, 1:30.
And for those of us who aren't in the military,
Sorry,
that'd be 1:30, right?
approximately 1:30 PM. Yeah.
Okay. I can do that math, I think. And then you were there until what time at night?
I don't recall the exact time until we decided to
Okay.
convene till the next day.
And your primary goal at that point was excavation, is that right?
After I had returned, they reassigned me to help with the property.
Okay, and what role specifically? Were you at the fire pit or were you at the tree back behind the pasture there?
Primarily the fire pit area.
Okay, and do you recall who was with you at the fire pit?
There were multiple people.
When you say multiple, how many are we talking about?
I don't even want to estimate. There
That
was
many?
people coming and going.
Oh,
So I don't
okay.
recall who was there and when.
And they were handing off the shovels and the tools used to do that?
Not necessarily handing them off, maybe expanding areas to look at and sift through.
And at one time, how many people would you say were digging around the fire pit with you?
I don't want to testify to that. I don't know.
You don't want to testify or you don't know?
I don't know. I don't know for sure how many.
Was it more than two?
Yes.
Was it more than four?
Yes.
Was it more than eight?
I don't know.
Okay, and were you using just shovels?
No, they had sifters, hand tools, shovels.
So shovels, sifters, hand tools, anything else, or is that it?
Not that I can recall.
Other than digging in the dirt in the fire pit, was there any other obstruction in the fire pit that you recall having difficulty with?
Repeat that question.
Any difficulty in digging in the soil when you were at the fire pit?
Where we found Tylee's remains.
Yes, where Tylee's remains were found.
Just how careful we wanted to be.
Okay. So there were no boards, there were no obstructions, there were no rocks or anything like that. It was soil that you had to dig through. Is that fair?
There was some clumps of rock or hard.
Yeah, but nothing else, just small clumps?
Not that I recall.
Okay, and were you there primarily for a significant amount of the time of the excavation?
Yes.
Okay, okay, good. And Judge, I think that's all I have. I think that's all I have at this point.
All right, if we could have the published exhibit removed from the screen there, Mr. Fire. Did we note on the record the time frame stamp of when that stopped? We may not have.
109, 103, it looks like, Judge.
Okay,
A
thank you.
minute 3 is, looks like when it was stopped is what I look like I have, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. All right, I'll let council return then and we'll have redirect Mr. Wixom.
Detective Wheeler, you were asked several questions by Mr. Pryor about, in your experience, different reactions that people have in terms of levels of nervousness.
Yes.
And he asked you a question about whether or not someone might typically get nervous with a simple traffic stop.
Correct.
Answer that. Can you just explain, is that your common experience as a law enforcement?
Yes, I think that most people do get a little nervous when they get stopped by police.
Yeah. In your experience, when someone's about to have a serious crime such as bodies on their property found, would they normally get nervous?
I would assume, yes.
Would they be curious and looking back at the property where the bodies were buried?
Yes.
So if
Officer,
they
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you just speak more directly?
I'm
into your
sorry.
mic? You
Yep.
kind of moved over and we're
Sorry.
not getting your signal.
in your experience, Detective Wheeler, if someone is about to be discovered in a crime, about to be caught in a crime, have you ever experienced someone just acknowledging that and just surrendering because they know they're caught?
It is common for suspects when confronted with possibly getting caught to try to distance themselves from whatever they're getting.
What? Let me ask it a different way. So, have you ever experienced a situation where evidence was being found immediately and the reaction of the suspect was just to accept it and not resist or argue or react in any way? Judge, this, oh,
Overruled.
go ahead now. Answer that question,
We
please.
repeat that question.
Have you ever, in your experience as a law enforcement officer, ever been in a situation where evidence was about to be discovered that incriminated the suspect and they just reacted calmly without any nervousness and just basically acquiesced?
Very few times.
But it has happened?
Yes.
Mr. Pryor asked a question about when Mr. Daybell was looking back at the property and he was looking curiously. Do you remember that question?
Correct.
Yeah. Would you say that another reason why someone might be curious about all these law enforcement digging on your property could be that you were aware they're about to find bodies that you knew were buried on your property? Could that cause curiosity?
Yes.
Mr. Pryor asked you a question about the speed in the roadway in front of Mr. Daybell's property. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. And again, what was the speed on that road?
50 miles an hour.
And I think you testified that it may not be abnormal for someone living on that street to drive out into the street and then quickly accelerate to 50 miles an hour or more.
Correct.
Yeah. Would you disagree that someone who believed that bodies that were buried on his property might be a reason, in addition to that, why they might quickly get on the roadway and drive away quickly and accelerate like you've talked about?
Yes.
There's been some discussion as well. There's some questions from Mr. Pryor about the fire pit. And I just want to flesh that out a bit. You testified earlier that you were present when Tylee's remains were recovered,
Yes,
and you participated in that.
yes,
We've talked about the fire pit. Are you familiar with what's been called a pet cemetery on that property?
yes.
Overruled.
Can you explain to the jury, were any of Tylee's remains found in the pet cemetery?
So when I became involved, I don't know what the team had designated as cemetery and fire pit. So I can't testify to where exactly they had designated those points, but they were in that area that I assisted.
Did you become familiar with at least generally where the team was, what they were calling was the pet cemetery?
Sustained.
Did you receive any knowledge based upon what the team effort was, what had been designated by law enforcement there as what they were going to call the pet cemetery?
Mr. Wixom.
Because I'm asking based on his knowledge simply if he knew what law enforcement designated as that area.
Mr. Pryor, please enter the microphone.
And in response to that, that knowledge would only be obtained through hearsay. Renew my objection, Your Honor.
What would be the exception, Mr. Wixom?
Judge, I'm not offering to prove it for the truth of the matter as to where the pet cemetery was. I'm simply asking this witness if he knew that area, generally speaking, as they were conducting their investigation for the remains, the area that they were calling that. But that's all.
Judge, and it's absolutely being asked for the truth of the matter asserted. That's exactly why he's asking it.
The objection's overruled. I find it as an exception to the hearsay rule, and the officer can answer the question.
I was familiar with the area called the pet cemetery.
And where was the pet cemetery in relation to the fire pit?
It was to the west and to the side a little bit, not very far away.
So in your earlier testimony, when you talked about the direction that Mr. Daybell was looking in the back of your patrol car, do you remember that testimony?
Yes.
And I think you testified you used the term fire pit.
Yes,
Can I just be clear for the jury? Was the pet cemetery in the same general direction as the fire pit where Mr. Daybell was looking?
yes,
You were asked some questions about the use of shovels and tools in attempting to recover Tylee's remains.
yes.
Could you explain a little bit more to the jury what kind of cautions and efforts were made to uncover those remains?
The majority of what I did, I was on my hands and knees with brushes and little hand tools, removing portions of dirt away from the mass that we had found.
Without being too graphic, when you were removing those portions of dirt, did you personally find any portion of her remains?
Yes,
Can you describe those remains that you'd found?
Judge, I'm going to object.
Basis.
He doesn't have the knowledge to identify remains, Judge. I haven't heard anything foundation-wise to allow him to make that kind of an assessment.
Well, on the objection, Mr. Wixom, he can testify to what he found. I don't know that there's enough foundation to accurately identify who was found.
Thank you. Detective Wheeler, did you find what you believe to be human remains?
yes.
Can you be specific about what you are finding?
We'd found a portion of a skull and started to uncover that. Then there was flesh and other bones in a bucket, melted.
And at the time that the search was being conducted, were you aware of the names of the people whose remains they were looking for?
Yes,
What were those names?
JJ and Tylee.
At any point in time, besides the remains of Tylee and the remains of JJ, were any other human remains found on the property?
No,
So going back to the method and the manner that you used to recover these remains? You said, I think you said you used a brush at points.
Brushes and hand tools
Why did you use those specific types of tools?
to try to keep what we were uncovering together without falling apart.
Not to be oversimplistic, but why is that important in this kind of a recovery in the ground of remains? Why do you need to do that?
I think it assists in identification purposes and evidence collecting, so we don't lose anything.
Is it fair to say that that's a careful process?
Yes.
You were asked questions about passing off shovels or different shovels and tools. When you were engaged in this recovery of her remains and you observed other law enforcement, did you ever see anybody in any way haphazardly use those tools?
Judge, objection, mischaracterizing the question and the testimony.
Overruled.
I didn't see anybody using them. I don't know the word that you used. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Did you see anybody using them in any way that was haphazard or not cautious?
No,
So at no point when the remains were being recovered, did you see any conduct by law enforcement that wasn't conscientious and careful?
no.
I think you're a 17-year law enforcement veteran. Is that correct?
18?
18. Thank you. Are you familiar with the term consciousness of guilt?
Yes.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. We're going well beyond the scope of cross-examination.
I like a quick sidebar. All right, thank you, counsel. After the sidebar, the court is sustaining the objection, and I'll move to strike that last question. So, Mr. Wixom, if you could ask a different question, please.
Thank you. Detective Wheeler, if someone gets in a car and flees quickly or appears to, what can that be indicative of?
Judge, calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Could be that they have knowledge that something is going to be found or some sort of guilt.
Would that go back to that term, consciousness of guilt?
Judge, can we approach sidebar, please?
All right, after sidebar, the court is again striking that last question. Mr. Wixom, if you'd move on to another question, please.
Certainly. Just a last couple of questions. Can you explain again the timing of when Mr. Daybell had left the property and as to when you'd found out that JJ's remains had been found?
Later, I had discovered that it was simultaneously, meaning as Chad was leaving, detectives were coming around the house and saw him leaving and advised me to stop him.
Judge, I'm going to move to strike its hearsay.
Response, Mr. Wixom.
Your Honor, I can re-ask the question.
Very well.
Yep. When you had stopped Mr. Daybell and had him get out of the car and come back to the back, you indicated that that's when he was met by the 4 or 5 officers, including Lieutenant Ball. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
And we just saw the video where the first thing Lieutenant Ball said was, "We found JJ's remains."
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes.
That happened how long after Mr. Daybell had gotten his car and drove away?
Just prior.
Moments, seconds? What's your best recollection?
I wasn't back there, so I don't know the exact time they located him, but
I'm asking the statement from Lieutenant Ball to Chad,
right.
that timing, how long was that statement made to him? How much earlier had he driven away?
Oh, just within minutes.
And when you were there helping with Kylie's remains, I think you testified earlier that you weren't directly involved with the recovery of JJ's remains,
Correct.
but you were on scene and you made observations about that.
Yes.
Are you aware of whether or not, pursuant to that search warrant or the way the search was conducted, was law enforcement looking inside the house for remains?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
I can't testify to that.
The whole time were you there, did you see any law enforcement going inside the house?
Just at the beginning when they made contact.
And then after that, did they all go outside?
Yes.
So as far as you are aware, all of the search was happening outside on the property.
Yes.
Is there any question that you have as to the direction that Chad was looking on your patrol cam when he looks back over his right shoulder? What direction was he looking?
Judge, that's a compound question, and he's asking an affirmation from this witness. I'm going to object.
Well, on the compound, it's sustained.
What direction was Chad looking when he was looking over his right shoulder in the patrol cam?
In the direction of the fire pit and pet cemetery.
You were asked about this several times by Mr. Pryor. Is there any question that regardless of what else he may have been able to see or look at, that general direction was right at the pet cemetery?
Judge, this has been asked and answered by counsel.
Sustained.
Thank
It's
you.
asked and answered.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right.
Judge, there were some issues that were brought up. I'd like the opportunity.
In limited scope, all out, Mr.
Thank you,
Pryor.
Your Honor. Now, officer, I heard an interesting comment from you. As you were testifying, you made a comment that I subsequently learned. Did you talk to anybody about your testimony at the break in this case?
No.
You didn't talk to any other law enforcement?
No.
So when you said that you subsequently learned, when did that knowledge come to you?
What are you referencing?
I'm referencing the fact that you subsequently, now I forgot what the context of that was. We're going to move on, Judge. And it may come to me. I want to clarify a couple of things. When you say that Mr. Daybell left when he learned about finding remains on his property, was that when he was parked in the driveway?
In his residence,
Yeah.
when he left Emma's residence in his vehicle, shortly after I learned that body was found.
Okay, so and that's what I'm trying to clarify a little bit. So Mr. Daybell was parked in the driveway, then he went over to Emma's residence, and it's unclear, and I understand that we don't know whether he was there for an hour and a half or for 2 hours in Emma's residence, right?
Yes,
And at that point, he didn't know anything about anything being on the property that has been located by law enforcement at that point. Would you agree with that?
I don't know what he could see from there.
Okay, but he wasn't told by anybody that they found anything at that point, correct?
Not by me,
Right, or anybody else.
not that I know of.
Right. And then when he gets in his vehicle and he drives away, the prosecutor eloquently used the words fleeing, but we don't know what he was thinking at that point, do we?
No,
And only after he was stopped by you and those other several officers and notified what was going on, that's when he learned about it, after he drove away and after he had driven down the road, correct?
I can't testify to what he knew.
Okay, but he was told about the remains at that point. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
All right, I have nothing else, Judge. Thank you.
All right, that will conclude the testimony of this witness. Is this witness going to be recalled by either side?
I may recall him, Judge.
We may call him later by the state, Your Honor, but he can be excused for today as far as the state is concerned.
All right, well, Detective Wheeler, if you are to be recalled, again, you're still under an exclusionary order, so you are not permitted to view any of the footage of the trial, the testimony that's being live streamed, or discuss your testimony further until you return to testify. Otherwise, you may be excluded from testifying. So please keep that admonishment in mind in between now and when you may be recalled in the case. With that, then that will conclude this Detective Wheeler's testimony. And let me inquire from the state. Do you have another witness we can get started with before we take lunch?
No, we could. We could begin with Lieutenant Joe Powell.
Let's go ahead and get a next witness started and try to go till noon before we take lunch, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you?
All right, Lieutenant Powell's been sworn. Before we get started with testimony, let me just indicate again, there's an exclusionary rule in this case. Lieutenant Powell, have you been observing any of the trial testimony in this case since it started?
No.
All right, have you discussed anyone else's testimony that's come before you in the trial?
No.
All right, with that in mind, Mr. Wixom, then you can go ahead and inquire on direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Lieutenant Powell.
Good morning.
Will you please state and spell your full name for the record?
Joseph Powell, Powell.
And where do you work?
Vermont County Sheriff's Office?
What is your lieutenant, correct?
Yes,
How long have you worked for that office?
22 years.
Have you ever worked as a law enforcement officer anywhere else?
No,
How long have you been a detective?
I was a detective for about 4.5 years.
What was your prior rank?
Patrol,
And have you been post-certified?
yes.
Could you briefly explain to the jury what that involves?
You go to the post academy. When I went through, it was 12 weeks of training.
Have you ever received any additional training or certification?
Yes, they require 40 hours every 2 years, so that continuing education.
So over the last 22 years, roughly 11 times you've had to get 40 hours of training.
That just went in effect, but yeah, there's lots of hours of training.
Did you get any specific training as a detective?
Yes,
And did you work as a detective prior to becoming a lieutenant?
yes,
How many years?
about 4.5 years.
I want to, well, first let me ask this. As a lieutenant, is it ever part of your role to become involved with unattended deaths?
Yes.
Could you just explain to the jury, what does that term mean, an unattended death?
There's nobody around when they wake up, they discover somebody's dead. There's nobody around to know what happened.
So why would law enforcement want to be involved and just look at that situation?
To see if there's any foul play.
I want to draw your attention back to nearly 5 years ago, back in October of 2019. Do you recall ever being involved in an unattended death of Tammy Daybell?
Yes, I was notified of her unattended death.
And who are you notified by?
Detective Mattingly,
Why did he notify you?
when there's an unattended death in Fremont, they notify the lieutenant, the chief deputy, and the sheriff.
What's the purpose to have your subordinates notify you about that?
So if there's any questions or they need help with the part of the investigation, and so the sheriff knows what's going on in the county.
Excuse me. What was the date of that? Do you recall?
October 19th, 2019.
At that point in time, what was your understanding of as what the investigation had determined about Tammy's death?
Natural causes.
Shortly after the 19th of October, were you ever contacted by law enforcement from Gilbert, Arizona?
Yes,
And what date did that happen?
October 31st, 2019.
How were you contacted? Was it in person, by phone, email? How did,
I was contacted by phone.
and what did you learn from that contact?
They was inquiring about Tammy Daybell's death, asked if they could get a copy of the report, and asking for assistance.
Okay. Do you recall, did they say anything else about Tammy Daybell's death and the reason for their request for the report?
Judge calls for hearsay.
Yes, sustained.
After the phone call, what did you decide to do in regard to Tammy Daybell's death?
I sent him a copy of the report.
And what about you personally? Did you take any steps to look at the case?
Yes, I reviewed the report and then later on ended up getting her medical records.
Okay. Well, we'll pause here. So Gilbert, Arizona contacted you about Tammy Daybell's death.
Yes,
Did they request any other assistance or help with anything else?
yes, they asked to
Judge,
locate.
objection calls for hearsay.
Said a request isn't offered for the truth.
Overruled. You can answer.
They asked if we could help locate a 2018 gray Jeep Wrangler with Texas plates.
Did you get any information as to why you were seeking to locate that?
They believed that it was in Fremont County.
Did they tell you why they wanted to find the Jeep?
It was involved in an attempted shooting.
Did they give any names in terms of that were in connection with that shooting?
Yes, Alex Cox, Lori Vallow, and they believe they had ties to Chad Daybell.
Did the name Charles Vallow ever come up
I don't recall for sure
at that time? You
at
don't
that
recall?
time.
So they asked you to look for a Jeep. What did you do next?
Drove out to, they gave me the address of 202 North, 1900 East. It's in Fremont County. So I drove out to that residence.
Did you determine who lived there?
Chad Daybell.
Did you find the Jeep?
No,
Do you recall what date it was that you drove out there?
October 31st, 2019.
What did you do after you determined that the Jeep wasn't there?
I notified Gilbert that we couldn't locate the Jeep there, and if they needed more assistance to let us know.
And did you in fact get more assistance from them?
Yes, the next day, November 1st, I received an email asking me to check a couple more addresses.
And did you do that?
One was a PO box in Sugar City, so I knew it was a post office, so I did not go there. But the next one was 565 Pioneer Road in Rexburg, and yes, we did go there.
And what did you find there?
We surveilled the residence, but never located the Jeep.
When you say surveilled, can you explain that a little bit more to the jury? What your
We-
process is?
We sat a ways away from the residence and watched for vehicles coming and going, people coming and going.
And did you observe anybody coming and going from that residence?
Yes,
Who did you observe?
Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
Prior to engaging in that surveillance, had you done anything to identify what Chad Daybell looked like?
Yes,
How did you do that?
driver's license photo.
Did you do the same for Lori Vallow?
Yes.
And how did you do that?
Gilbert, Arizona had sent a picture.
Did you eventually, let me withdraw that. Do you recognize Chad Daybell in the courtroom today?
Yes.
And what is he wearing?
Blue shirt and a yellow tie
Where is he seated?
at the defendant's table.
So you said at some point in your surveillance, you saw Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow. Is that correct?
Yes.
Explain to the jury when you first saw them.
First, we seen Chad Daybell leave the 565 Pioneer Road, and we surveilled him out to 202 North, 1900 East.
And Judge, if I could have some foundation as to time, date, place, year.
All right, Mr. Wixom, if you'd like to re-ask with more detail.
Sure. Lieutenant Powell, what date was it that we're talking about that you were surveilling and first see Chad and Lori?
November 1st, 2019.
And these addresses that you were surveilling, where were they again?
One's in Madison County and one would be in Fremont County in Idaho.
And which address was it that you first saw Chad and Lori at?
565 Pioneer Road in Madison County,
And what was the date that you saw them?
November 1st, 2019.
Recall what time of day that was?
I don't recall time.
Do you recall morning, afternoon, evening?
Morning.
Thank you. So forgive me, I forgot where I left off, but what was it that you first saw them doing?
On the way down to surveil that, we also contacted Rexburg PD, so they was involved with the surveillance
Why did you do that?
because we was going to be in their jurisdiction.
Is that normal for law enforcement,
Yes,
just to touch base with each other?
yes,
Did they come and assist at all?
yes, they did.
So you made that contact, then what did you do?
We followed Chad Daybell from the 565 Pioneer Road to 202 North, 1900 East.
And what did they do at that location?
He went in the residence for a little while and then left. We surveilled him to Mountain America Credit Union in Rexburg, Idaho. And then we lost him after that, so we went back and surveilled the house again, the apartment.
Back that same day or a different day?
Same day.
About what time was it that you went back?
I don't know exact time. I'm guessing late morning.
What'd you see next?
We seen Lori Vallow leave and go to Sugar City to the post office
Anything else?
After there, she goes to Walgreens, and then after Walgreens, back to the apartment.
What did they do at the apartment?
Then they both go from the apartment to Idaho Falls. We surveil them to Mountain America or the Mountain Credit Union in Idaho Falls, and then the Hobby Lobby, and then the Cafe Rio.
Excuse me. What did you observe them doing, if anything, at Hobby Lobby?
Holding hands as they is walking in the store.
And let me ask, did you take any photographs of that?
I did not.
Did any other law enforcement take photographs of that?
Yes,
Do you recall who it was?
I don't recall.
Did you later see the photographs?
Yes,
Do you believe that if shown, you might be able to recognize those?
yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would offer what's been marked as the state's Exhibit 36B. Got 2 copies for the court.
Judge, I'm going to voice an objection for relevance. I'm not seeing the relevance here.
All right, if I could if I could view the exhibit, please, before I rule on the objection. Objection's been made, Mr. Wixom, as to relevance.
Judge, at this point, it goes to what's in the photo we believe shows the nature of the relationship, which isn't just relevant for this witness's testimony, but for the theory of the case overall. It helps to show the relationship between the two.
All right, I've considered the objection, given the nature of the conspiracy charges in the case, find there is relevance under 403 and will therefore overrule the objection, and the exhibit 36B may be admitted.
Thank you. May I ask to have those handed to the witness, please? And Lieutenant Powell, even though these have been admitted, just to give context, what do you see in front of you?
Chad and Lori walking in the Hobby Lobby holding hands.
Mr. Wixom, I want to be clear. You're saying these, is there one exhibit or more than one?
I apologize. I handed 2 up to you. It's just one exhibit, 34 or 36B, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you bet. They're holding hands.
Yes,
So even though you didn't take this picture, do you believe that's an accurate reflection of what they were doing?
yes.
You know, at this time, I would request permission to publish this to the jury.
You may.
So Lieutenant Powell, if you'll please look at the monitor up there, this photo. Since we didn't all have your vantage point, will you just explain again what they were doing to the jury?
They're holding hands walking in the Hobby Lobby.
Were they holding hands the whole time walking in?
Yes.
Now, did you go inside the Hobby Lobby?
No, we did not.
What did you do while they were inside the Hobby Lobby?
Waited outside.
And how long do you believe they were in there?
I don't recall.
But did you wait long enough to see them exit the Hobby Lobby?
Yes.
And what did they do after that?
Got in their vehicle and drove over to Cafe Rio.
What happened then? Did they go inside?
Yes.
Did you happen to go inside?
Yes, myself and Chief Deputy Gardner went inside.
Did you observe them in there?
Yes.
You know, at this time, the state would offer State's Exhibit 35, which is already been stipulated to be admitted, but 2 copies for the court.
All right, I understand there is no objection then based on what Mr. Wixom has proffered on exhibit 35. Is that correct, Mr. Fryer?
It is, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, exhibit 35 is admitted.
You know, I may have permission to publish it.
You may.
And before I do so, could I just confirm, Judge, was that last exhibit admitted? Did I move for admission?
It was 36B is admitted.
Thank you. What is that a picture of, Lieutenant Powell?
Chad and Lori eating at Cafe Rio.
And did you observe anything else about their behavior or conduct together while they were at Cafe Rio?
No.
What happened after they left at Cafe Rio?
We ended the surveillance.
Why did you end it there?
The time of night and prior engagements people had.
Okay. Your Honor, it would now be an appropriate time to stop my direct examination, considering the hour.
Yes, let's go ahead and take our lunch break at this time. We will try to do it in an hour, back on at 1, but we'll allow sufficient time for the jurors also to have their lunch and take the break necessary. So we'll come back on after the break.
All rise, please.